Sent from another dimension. Ever wonder why images of liminal spaces are so eerily familiar? While sometimes unnerving, oddly they can simultaneously even seem comforting, mysteriously invoking a long-lost feeling of joy or sense of deja vu. Well, have you ever heard of the Backrooms? I'm talking about the post that appeared on 4chan back in 2019. Uploaded by an anonymous user, the image is of level 0 of the Backrooms. It consists of a crooked shot through a yellow wallpapered hallway with, as Anon described, damp beige carpet, loud buzzing fluorescent lights, and an endless maze of rooms. The picture was basically a traditional liminal space image, starting the liminal ambient space picture trend, which continues to this day. The original 4chan uploader warned that if you've heard something following you in the Backrooms, it sure as hell has already heard you. Ever find yourself in a liminal space? Or notice a suspiciously out-of-place, nondescript building? A sprawling bank complex absent of activity? Ever see an object vanish before your eyes, never to be found? Why would totally random low-res pictures from the late 80s and early 90s that are always entirely devoid of people exclusively evoke this specific feeling of weird nostalgia? Or is it nostalgia mixed with fear? For some people, liminal space photos can seem like places that they've visited in dreams. Basically, liminal space photographs are architecture without people, but not all pictures that fit this criteria are liminal spaces. To be a liminal space, it's got to appear to be not quite right, not from this place, yet hauntingly familiar. Some of these images of retro malls and arcades at night speak of the carefree familiarity and comfort of childhood, especially if you grew up in the 90s. The content with being left alone just before closing time in an artificial environment where everything you could ever want is conveniently before your eyes, as if it was made just for you. I've got a theory as to where these images are coming from and why they have this power. It all began with that picture of level 0 of the Backrooms. There's a reason they're all familiar. They're all connected. They're all the same place. And it's a very real place. Maybe too real. The Backrooms. I think I might have discovered another dimension. A top secret, highly classified alternate reality. An entire universe that has existed, according to the internet so far, since the 1980s. Async Research, likely a government-contracted research and development laboratory, had created a kind of Stargate, a doorway to the Backrooms by manipulating incalculably large magnetic energy vortexes using unprecedented advancements in computer technology to design highly sophisticated scientific machinery the likes of which the world had never seen. The goal of this project was essentially to create access to an infinite alternate dimension of storage, separate from our dimension, all simulated by a program. This alternate dimension would be absolutely physically real, but simulated and randomly artificial, accessed and generated by synchronized recursive computer algorithms regulating hypermassive magnetic and electromagnetic polarity field disruptors, distorting the simulation program into a forced inverse manifestation, if you will. The control room level is massive and self-regulating, consisting of rows and stacks of beeping consoles, switchboards, dials, monitors, levers, gauges, and meters. The control room level exists inside its own system, part of the complex. It's accessible through and only inside the other dimension. The magnetic field disturbance threshold, which creates the entrance to the complex, was designed to replicate the dimension it was modeled after, our own environment in the late 1980s. It was supposed to be a predictable system. It was supposed to be completely controlled, redesignable, and codable down to the placement of any fathomable needed object. The physical manifestation of the artificial simulation world was not as predictable as anticipated. When async researchers first donned their oxygen suits to cross the threshold into the unknown dimension, they split up into teams of 3 and brought with them oxygen masks, respirators, visors, and wore full yellow bodysuits. They carried a tether to the gate for the first expeditions and also a directional arrow marker tape roller to mark the floor so as not to lose their progress. At first, nothing went awry, other than the hostile air quality because of the unusually high amount of bacteria in the dank, moist air. The project developer's executive supervisor was able to take a short tour of the intended storage facility. Even a big table model 3D map was built inside close to the entrance, depicting all the known areas secured up to that point. The unpredictability of invisible portals and changing rooms became terrifyingly clear the more the immeasurably unending complex was explored. Hallways and rooms were found to consistently replicate. Portals to unknown levels appeared out of nowhere that led into disorganized, random environments with varying, out-of-place, unpredictable, and obscure architecture. Immediately, researchers began to become lost in mazes and glitch out in hallways and rooms that changed before their eyes, and sent them running through endless connecting corridors, tunnels, and rooms upon rooms, where the laws of physics are not as we comprehend. Once I got caught up in fascination with whatever it was about the Backrooms that seemed all so familiar and undeniably personal, I watched all the found footage I could get my hands on. I watched footage of the very first expeditions, and in one of them, one of a group of 3 finds a narrow hallway while traversing the tape path and captures a glitch in the system with his camera. While sweeping back around to go back to the group, a visible digital-looking static environmental glitch causes the others in his group to instantly disappear into a digital swooping wave that sent a shockwave reverberating loudly down the now completely deserted corridor. After that, the researcher begins to panic and lose orientation, but maintains his composure. While searching through rows of slightly different rooms and hallways through the offensively buzzing lights, yellow wallpaper sprawls for miles through the changing beige carpeted maze. Eventually, he comes to an obligatory auditorium-style looking room, but there would be no real practical use for it, as when carefully inspected, the design doesn't match up to anything. The camera turns off here, and we pick back up again in a dark room lined with hundreds of pillars, seemingly for miles. As he tries to maintain a straight northward trajectory, he's tackled by an unknown entity from the dark. The person turns out to be a lost explorer from a previous expedition, but as the camera cuts in and out, either from classified editing or carbon tape degeneration from age, it becomes difficult to tell what happens from this point on. The video continues with finding the same researcher alone now, seemingly being pursued by a loud grinding siren noise, an entity, and begins to recognize objects that appear like the beginning of the entrance to the Backrooms. As you can see from the footage, he recognizes where he is now and quickly makes his way away from whatever is pursuing him towards the threshold entrance door, which opens like in a video game, revealing a similar yet slightly foreign version of the laboratory that he entered the threshold through. A blaring loud alarm sounds and red lights illuminate the reflective metal flashing all around the room. Then the video ends. The video of the surveillance footage from the threshold room shows the perspective of the explorer returning through the threshold. He is audibly relieved to notice human-like objects in his environment almost immediately, but apprehensive to approach any of his colleagues at first. He actually hides in the hallway until somebody hears him cough, because of exposure to the moist air of the Backrooms for so long. Immediately, an agent-looking G-Man type approaches him and confirms that he came back in through the threshold door, thus escaping the other dimension back into the real world. That's where the video cuts out. I watched the found footage for hours glued to my TV screen. It all looked so real and made me wonder how it could possibly be made if it was fake. Some of the cooler footage I saw was of a Neon Palm mall level where you're inside a mall made of marble and there's red neon signs, pinstriping, and decorative palm trees. There are arcades to be found on the Neon Mall level that are full of lit up and working arcade machines, dinging, buzzing, popping, ringing, and beeping. I assume that these must cost 25 cents to play at least, because I've never seen an explorer on film actually playing one of these arcade games. Maybe they didn't have the quarters. These video games look all to be popular recognizable arcade cabinets from the late 80s and early 90s that you would find in an arcade, like Donkey Kong, Street Fighter II, Pole Position, Pac-Man, and other various 80s games. Even fortune-telling machines and prize claws. The pinball machines I've seen in the Neon Mall level are all the same, circus pinball, but the arcade cabinets have an otherworldly resemblance of uniformity and perfection, appearing larger than life in an impossible to describe way. There's doors inside the arcades that usually lead to diners, but they will obviously be devoid of any people. Sometimes there will be food, though you don't really get hungry in the Backrooms and you don't need to use the bathroom, so most people spend most of their time exploring and trying to find a way out. I also saw footage of the control room, which was my favorite. It's a sprawling expanse of escalators and consoles filled to the brim with blinking lights, buttons, and every kind of switch, meter, and gauge. Inside some of the circular consoles are even more interior consoles and computer equipment lit with red light. It looks like all of the technology here was designed around the late 80s and early 90s because all the phones have spiral cords. All the keyboards and computers are from that era. As you wander the expansive corridors on the control room level, you will encounter row upon row of stacks of computer mainframes, servers, and boards, and every kind of piece of electronic equipment or monitoring device that you can envision. It's like being on the bridge of the USS Enterprise, except alone and on a much bigger scale. The video found footage of the control room was found on an expedition in the 90s, years after it was filmed, along with the footage of the arcade and the mall. It is unknown what year this footage was filmed. It's fascinating to watch exploration footage of the pool rooms level because the water can seem so hypnotically saturated with blue color when shimmering upon the endless white tiles and glass. The railings and randomly placed stainless steel pool fixtures create a complex aesthetic paradise. There are even levels in the Backrooms dimension where gravity and the laws of physics don't apply in a straightforward way, like doors that open facing down to floors or up to ceilings, like a repeating MC Escher painting. The hotel level contains some of my very favorite rooms because they're all decorated in elegantly fancy 1930s Art Deco style. I've seen photos of the legendary ballroom on this level, but legend has it any explorer that makes it there can't ever figure out how to get back, and I have not seen any video footage. On the hotel level, you'll find horn-style phonograph record players, self-winding and spinning 78 RPM shellac records with 1930s jazz music, hauntingly echoing through the delightfully creepy corridors of the hotel level. Just be careful not to approach any of these phonograph record players because the entities seem to be kept appeased somewhat by the sound of the music playing, and don't like it to stop or be disturbed. On just about any level, unknown tunnels or portal trapdoors will open up into blizzard on top of a snow-covered mountain range, or a place in a very creepy suburban artificial neighborhood at night that are just slightly askew and sometimes lit with strange colored lighting. Once in a while, the doors to one of these houses will be open, but chances are there's an entity inside and you don't want to go in there. But not always. Trust your better judgment and follow your instincts. If you encounter an entity, you'll hear it if it awakens. But if you do hear one, it's most likely heard you too. Not all entities are malicious, but if you encounter one, let's just say that's where most video footage ends. These artificial suburban neighborhoods at night will open up at one end with a tunnel and consist of a street, dimly illuminated with street lights, or sometimes no lights at all. The horizon will either be a vast sky full of stars or an oddly artificial-looking rotating belt of stars that look closer than they should. Inside of the houses exists some furniture and even doors to sublevels, but most of the time going inside the houses isn't a way to access an entire other level, just more sublevels of whatever level you're already on. At some points, it becomes unclear to tell what level you are exploring because, although most architecture will appear as variations of level 0 in the others, you will also randomly encounter vast empty supermarkets, libraries, or other incomplete commercial, residential, or business areas. The sheer depth, volume, and size of the complex is unknown, so essentially anything goes. You could walk through a portal into any environment. The elevators are also a way to quickly skip past hundreds of levels to vastly different levels than ones that we seem to know so far. I do not doubt that there are countless explorers or even digitally created artificially intelligent inhabitants that live in that world, as ignorantly oblivious to what we call the only reality as we are unsure of their existence. Interaction with entities is rarely ever proven helpful. There are much scarier and more aggressive entities to be found in the darkest places inside the Backrooms. There are also multiple types of entities, my personal favorite being the Smiler. A Smiler will show up as a grin of razor shark-like teeth and eyes that glisten white in the dark. A Smiler entity hides in the darkest corners and shadows, or in areas with little or no lighting, usually unbeknownst to the filmer at the time. Explorers will sometimes find crudely drawn or specifically attention-grabbing arrows, marked as if for them on the wallpaper in black marker, leading the explorer to an intriguing-looking drawing warning them to keep still. or depicting some enticing puzzle baffling them for long enough to distract the explorer before the creature attacks. If one of these entities hears you, it will lurch at you, chasing you indefinitely, while howling the loudest, most horrific, obnoxious sound you've ever heard. And it really is. The screech of a pursuing entity is louder than the wail of an ambulance siren, but more guttural and animalistic than a yeti. They appear like dark insect segmented stick figure creatures with 2 long legs, 2 long crooked arms, horribly twisted, bearing giant sharp smiling teeth. They seem to have somewhat of a shape-shifting ability. I've watched these entities chase people into eerily lit rooms with no doors. If the entity doesn't catch the explorer, and if they manage to escape or hide in a place the entity can't reach or fall through a hole, the creepiest part is that even when they fall through a hole or gap to another level or an accessible point from the entity, until they have run for miles and it finally fades out of earshot, you can still hear its groans of agonizing disappointment. Sometimes entities will observe you without interacting, but they will usually never interact in a positive way. Entities have even been known to possess explorers to lead any unfavorable victims they might find wandering the complex straight to entities or into the perfect spot for the kill. If you encounter someone in the Backrooms who has been possessed by an entity, they will take the form of someone you know, but they will not act quite right to a noticeable degree. That takes us to where we are today. Despite my greatest efforts to impress everyone around me my entire life with my detailed perfectionism, my personality, looks, large vocabulary, artistic intellect, I remain an average, normal, realistically rational person, I like to tell myself, even though I'm into the creepy, scary, and dark. I've always not only commanded an unreasonable amount of attention to me, I've also always been attracted to most things that the consensus has agreed are scary. So essentially, even though I've always tried to tell everyone that I'm really just a normal person, there are definitely things I have done, seen, and felt that would never be able to be rationally explained by the regard of what those who call themselves human agree upon as normal in any measurable, realistic sense. I've always had a memory from my childhood of someone clearly explaining to me that only they understand the magnitude of my understanding, but no one else ever will, eternally. Yet I have no idea who this person was. I believe in alternate timelines, the multiverse theory suggesting any and all possible realities and timelines exist simultaneously, simply because it can't be proven that they don't. I've always felt as though I had a sort of best friend who was never really there in a sense, kind of like Tony from The Shining, but always getting me out of trouble by getting into it in another timeline. Walking around densely populated areas, I often find myself inside liminal spaces, and have even photographed them. I'm beginning to suspect there's a simple explanation as to why I can actually perceive this duality in my imagination with my own eyes and represent it in the real world. I believe that is why people are both drawn to me and at the same time repelled by me, because I represent both déjà vu and fear at the same time. I've always had a personality that can catch on to anyone's sense for any ultimate desire, that could be their greatest, most intricate fantasy of dreams, and I can look at it from the outside, summarize, then add the proverbial icing to the cake. Now, smart people are usually instantly terrified by this when they recognize me doing it, but people that don't get it are left truly puzzled. Just the same way, I was puzzled as to see pictures and video of a place and a scientific research project that I not only remember, but became the chalk outline blueprint for my DNA, what their energy forces and fields that play which govern the laws of the physical dimension in ways we do not yet understand. So at some point during the creation, existence, or destruction of that environment, what became me, my consciousness, experienced the dimension in its entirety. I became the singularity. It's why I'm an agent of forces I remember in a haze of amnesia that I am not consciously aware of myself. Top secret even from me. After the censored footage was leaked and declassified, in the final exploration video, you can see the explorers follow a scavenger hunt kind of trail of remains left behind on the carpet, assumedly on level 0, to around the corner of a hallway and towards an ominous room to find a body sitting inside on the floor, leaning against the wall, dressed in mostly black, deteriorating, tattered clothes. Upon closer examination, the body exhibits unrecognizable features from very excessive decomposition. The John Doe resembled a skeleton with clothes, sitting in a pile of his own rotting carbon like a puddle. Not only did the autopsy reveal an abnormally stunted degeneration rate, some organs had hardly decomposed at all, while others appeared centuries old and practically petrified like ash or coal. About half the organs discovered in the autopsy were recognizable with minimal decomposition. On this individual, however, the camera shows a focused, clear zoom shot of the body's face. And just the same way that I can see into the Backrooms even when I close my eyes, I can see my very own blonde, curly hair and blue eyes in the boy's face. I can tell right away. I recognize the person, and when I thought about it, it looked just like pictures of me I'd seen in old photo albums from the early 90s when I was about 5 years old. We all feel like we lose parts of ourselves from time to time, especially as we get older. I feel like a version of me got lost in that other dimension all those years ago, and influenced who the present me came to be. I only found it because I exist here now in 2023 on this timeline, but in the multiverse, we exist inside many timelines, dimensions, and in more than one place all at one time. Whether in your dreams, no clipping out of reality, or inside our subconscious, there is something out there, and its purpose has to do with us, individually and indefinitely. Pleasant dreams, everyone. You may even end up meeting yourself.